Part 4 of the Tuscarora series. This is where we're finally going to arrive at Noharoka itself. The goal is to make the listener, you, understand this is not a random village or a temporary camp. It was the Tuscarora preparing for what they believed might be their final fight for survival. This is the Tick Bite NC podcast. Fort Noharoka, the day Eastern North Carolina changed forever. The fortress on the Contentnia Creek. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. I want you to forget modern Greene County. I want you to forget paved roads. Forget tractors and power lines. Instead, I want you to picture Eastern North Carolina in the winter of 1712. The air is cold, the swamp is quiet, and smoke rises from cooking fires. Somewhere along the Contentnia watershed, people are working. They're not farming, they're not hunting. They're building, they're digging, and they're preparing. Because they know something's coming. The Tuscarora have already seen the violence. They've already seen settlements attacked. They've already seen military expeditions enter their homeland, and they know retaliation is coming. And they will know that it will be longer and larger than anything they've faced before. So they begin preparing for war. Not by running, not by surrendering, but by building a fortress, a place called Noharoka. This is what most people get wrong. When people hear the word fort, they picture soldiers, cannons, barracks, military uniforms. That's not what Noharoka was. Noharoka was first and foremost a refuge, a place where families gathered, and a place where people sought protection, a place where an entire community hoped to survive. Inside its walls were warriors, but there were also mothers, children, and grandparents. People who had no intention on fighting, but had nowhere else to go. Imagine hearing that large enemy force is coming, knowing that your villages throughout the region are no longer safe. What would you do? Where would you go if everyone else was going? Would you go with them? Would you go to the strongest place available? That place being Noharoka? One of the reasons Noharoka fascinates archaeologists is its location. The Tuscarora didn't choose the site by accident. The people who survive in the swamp country learn to use the landscape. The fort stood in terrain that offered natural advantages: swamps, lowlands, difficult approaches, and waterways. The same characteristics that make parts of eastern North Carolina difficult to navigate today helped protect 300 years ago. And the builders understood their environment. They knew how armies moved, they knew where attackers would struggle, and they knew where defenders would gain advantage. And that wasn't luck, it was planning. The same kind of planning that every successful military force uses. For many years, people assumed native fortifications were primitive, and then archaeologists began excavating Noharoka. What they found surprised a lot of people. The Tuscarora had constructed substantial defensive works, palisade walls, defensive trenches, bunkers, underground shelters, storage areas, evidence of organized construction, and evidence of military thinking. Lots of evidence of engineering. The fort covered roughly an acre and a half, and this wasn't a simple fence around a village. The defenses were designed to withstand attack. The Tuscarora were adapting. They understood that warfare was changing, and the people at Noharoka were responding to those changes. That's one of their most remarkable discoveries. From the archaeological work, the Tuscarora were not trapped in the past. They were learning and improvising. They were adjusting. They were trying to survive in a rapidly changing world. This is where the story becomes human. It's easy to discuss the walls and fortifications. It's harder to think about the people living behind them. Imagine a mother standing inside the fort. She hears rumors one day, stories of an advancing enemy, stories of villages destroyed, warriors gathering. And what does she tell her children? What does she tell herself? Imagine an elder, someone who remembers a different time, a time before the violence and a time before the war. Imagine that elder remembering a time before the settlers arrived, a time when this land was still felt secure. Now imagine that elder looking at the walls around Noharoka and realizing everything had changed. Now imagine yourself being a young warrior, maybe 14 or 15 years old. You know that battle's coming, and you know that people are counting on you. Your family is inside those walls, and you know that failure means disaster, not just for you, but for your people. And that's the reality that existed inside Noharoka, not just a military base, a community preparing for survival. Now, this is the part that always pulls me back home, because Noharoka was not some faraway place. It sat in the same watershed many of us know today, the Contentnia watershed. The same swamp country and the same terrain, the exact same landscape that I grew up on. When I think about the arrowheads I picked up as a child, when I think about the twisted pecan trees, and when I think about the stories of native settlements and graves, I think about all the artifacts dug from the ground around Tickbite, and I realize something. The people of Noharoka weren't living in some distant world. They were living in the same landscape, different century, but on the same land. The same water that flowed through the creeks and the same deer that crossed the woods. The same fish that swam the creeks and rivers. The same little ridge lines that rose above the swamps. The same cypress knees that stuck from the water. History feels distant until you realize it happened where you stand. While the Tuscarora prepared their defenses, their enemies were preparing too. South Carolina had answered North Carolina's request for help, and Colonel James Moore assembled a large force, European colonists and native allies, hundreds upon hundreds of warriors. The force that eventually marched towards Noharoka was unlike anything many Tuscarora communities had faced before. And perhaps the most painful reality was this. Most of the people marching against the Tuscarora were Native Americans themselves. Cherokee, Yamasee, Catawba, and other tribes. History's rarely simple. The old Hollywood version of history shows all Native people standing together, and reality was far, far more complicated. There were alliances and rivalries, political interests, old grievance, and the army moving towards Noharoka represented all of those things, and it was getting closer every day. By early 1713, everyone understood what was happening. The Tuscarora knew an attack was coming. The attackers knew where they were going. The collision was inevitable. Imagine the tension inside that fort. Every distant sound mattered. Every messenger mattered. Every report mattered. How far away are they? How many are coming? How long do we have? Will reinforcements arrive for us? Will the walls hold? Will we survive? Those questions echoed through Noharoka as winter turned to spring. People inside had done everything they could. They had chosen the strongest location available. They had built defenses, they had stored supplies, and they had gathered their families. Now all they could do was wait. The story of Noharoka is often told as a battle, but before it became a battlefield, it was a refuge. Before it became a tragedy, it was a community. And before it became an archaeological site, it was a home. The people inside those walls were not thinking about history. They were thinking about tomorrow. They were thinking about their children and about survival. They were thinking about whether the fort they had built would be enough. In the coming episode, their waiting ends. Colonel James Moore's army arrives. The siege begins. For weeks the defenders hold, and then the fighting intensifies. The walls are breached, the fort burns, and one of the most devastating events in North Carolina history unfolded beside the creeks and the swamps of Greene County. The story of Fort Noharoka will continue in the next episode. This has been Tick Bite NC.